The letter trembled in Sarah Victoria's hands as she stood on the wooden platform of the Deer Lodge, Montana train station. Her heart pounding so hard she feared it might burst through the worn fabric of her traveling dress. She had traveled nearly 2,000 miles from Philadelphia to marry a man she had never met, carrying with her a secret that could destroy everything before it even began. The year was 1878, and the Montana Territory was still wild and untamed, a place where people came to start fresh or to disappear entirely. Sarah had come for both reasons. The cool September air carried the scent of pine and wood smoke, so different from the coal-tinged atmosphere of the city she had left behind. She clutched her single carpet bag tighter, feeling the weight of her past pressing down on her shoulders like an invisible burden. "Miss Victoria." The voice was deep and warm, like honey over gravel, and when Sarah turned to face its owner, her breath caught in her throat. The man standing before her was tall and broad-shouldered, with sun-bronzed skin that spoke of years working under the Montana sky. His eyes were the color of rich earth, framed by lines that suggested he smiled often, though at the moment he looked as uncertain as she felt. He held his hat in his hands, sandy brown hair slightly mussed from where it had been. "Yes," Sarah managed, her voice barely above a whisper. "Are you Thomas Nash?" "I am." He offered her a gentle smile that transformed his entire face, making him look younger than his 32 years. "It is a real pleasure to finally meet you, Miss Victoria. I hope your journey was not too difficult." Sarah thought of the endless days on the train, the sleepless nights spent wondering if she was making the biggest mistake of her life, the constant fear that her secret would somehow be discovered before she had a chance to explain. But looking into Thomas Nash's kind eyes, she found herself saying, "It was long, but I am here now." Thomas reached for her carpetbag, and Sarah noticed how careful he was, how he moved with a deliberate gentleness that seemed at odds with his size. "My wagon is just over here. I figured we could head to the ranch, get you settled in the guest room. I know this is all very sudden and strange. I want you to feel comfortable." The guest room. Sarah felt a wave of relief wash over her. She had worried that Thomas might expect immediate intimacy, that her arrival would mean instant marriage and all that came with it. The fact that he was already thinking of her comfort eased some of the tension that had been coiled in her chest. The wagon was well maintained, the 2 horses hitched to it looking healthy and calm. Thomas helped her up onto the bench seat with a steady hand, his touch brief and respectful. As he climbed up beside her and took the reins, Sarah found herself studying him from the corner of her eye. He was handsome in a rugged way, with strong features and hands that looked capable of both hard work and gentle care. "The ranch is about an hour's ride from town," Thomas said as they started moving. "It is not fancy, but it is home. I have been working it for the past 8 years, building it up from almost nothing. I have about 200 head of cattle now, a decent house, a barn, and a few good horses." "It sounds wonderful," Sarah said, and she meant it. After the cramped tenement buildings of Philadelphia, the idea of open space and fresh air seemed like paradise. "I should be honest with you," Thomas continued, his eyes fixed on the road ahead. "I am not much for pretty words or fancy manners. I am a simple man who works hard and tries to do right by people. When I wrote to the marriage broker, I was not sure anyone would respond. A rancher in Montana is not exactly a prize catch." Sarah felt a pang in her chest. "You should not say that about yourself. You have built a life here, a home. That takes courage and determination." Thomas glanced at her, surprise flickering across his face. "You are kind to say so. Can I ask what made you answer my advertisement? A woman as pretty as you, I would think you would have had plenty of options back east." The question hung in the air between them, and Sarah felt her secret pressing against her lips, demanding to be released. But fear held it back. "Sometimes a fresh start is worth more than familiar options," she said carefully. They rode in comfortable silence for a while, the landscape opening up around them in ways that made Sarah's heart expand. Rolling hills covered in golden grass stretched as far as she could see, dotted with clusters of pine trees. Mountains rose in the distance, their peaks already touched with early snow. The sky was so vast and blue it made her dizzy to look at it. "It is beautiful here," she breathed. "It is," Thomas agreed. "Every morning I wake up and look out at this land and I feel grateful. It can be harsh sometimes, especially in winter, but there is a peace here I never found anywhere else." The ranch, when they finally reached it, was more impressive than Sarah had expected. The house was a solid structure of logs and stone, with a wide porch that wrapped around the front. The barn was large and well kept, and she could see several horses in a nearby corral. A dog came bounding up to greet them, tail wagging furiously. "That is Bear," Thomas said with a laugh as the dog jumped around excitedly. "He is mostly friendly, though he thinks he is a lot more fierce than he actually is." Sarah climbed down from the wagon and immediately knelt to greet the dog, who licked her face enthusiastically. "Hello, Bear. You are a handsome boy, are you not?" When she looked up, she found Thomas watching her with an expression she could not quite read. "He likes you. That is a good sign. Bear has never been wrong about people." Inside, the house was clean and simply furnished. The main room had a large stone fireplace, a wooden table with chairs, and a comfortable-looking sofa. Thomas showed her around with obvious pride, pointing out the kitchen, the washroom, and finally, a small bedroom that he had clearly prepared for her arrival. There were fresh wildflowers in a jar on the dresser, and the quilt on the bed looked newly washed. "I know it is not much," Thomas said, rubbing the back of his neck in a gesture Sarah was beginning to recognize as nervousness. "But I wanted you to have your own space." "I will not pressure you about anything, Miss Victoria. We can take as much time as you need to get to know each other before we make any decisions about marriage." Sarah felt tears prickling at the corners of her eyes. In all her worrying about this journey, she had not dared to hope for such kindness and understanding. "Thank you," she whispered. "You do not know how much that means to me. Are you all right?" Thomas stepped closer, concern evident in his voice. "I am fine," Sarah said quickly, wiping at her eyes. "It has just been a very long journey and I am tired. Of course. I will let you rest. There is water in the pitcher for washing, and I will have supper ready in a couple of hours. Nothing fancy, just stew and bread, but it will fill you up." After he left, closing the door quietly behind him, Sarah sank onto the bed and let out a shaky breath. She had been so afraid of what she would find here, so certain that she was walking into a nightmare. But Thomas Nash seemed like a genuinely good man, patient and kind, which made what she had to tell him all the more difficult. Sarah opened her carpet bag and pulled out a small bundle wrapped in soft cloth. Inside was a silver locket, the only valuable thing she owned. She opened it to reveal two tiny portraits, one of a young woman who looked remarkably like Sarah herself, and one of a small child with dark curls and bright eyes. "I am so sorry, Mama," Sarah whispered to the portrait. "I am trying to make things right. I promise I am trying." That evening, Sarah joined Thomas at the table for supper. He had been right about the food. It was simple but delicious, the stew rich and hearty, the bread still warm from the oven. They ate in companionable silence for a while before Thomas spoke. "I should tell you a bit more about myself," he said. "I came out here from Ohio about 10 years ago. My parents had a small farm there, but after they passed, I wanted something different. I worked on various ranches, learned the cattle business, saved my money, and eventually bought this land. It has been hard work, but good work. Do you have any other family? Sarah asked. A sister back in Ohio. She is married with 3 children. We write sometimes, but I have not seen her in years. What about you? Sarah's hand tightened around her spoon. My mother passed away 6 months ago. I have no siblings. There is no one left in Philadelphia for me. I am sorry about your mother, Thomas said gently. That must have been very difficult. It was. Sarah took a breath, trying to steady herself. She was all I had. Well, you are not alone anymore, Thomas said. Whether you decide to stay here as my wife or not, you have a place here for as long as you need it. I meant what I said about no pressure. His kindness was almost too much to bear. Sarah felt the weight of her secret growing heavier with every passing moment. She knew she should tell him now, before things went any further, before she started to care too much about what he thought of her. But fear kept the words locked inside. Over the next few weeks, Sarah settled into a routine at the ranch. Thomas was up before dawn every day, tending to the cattle and horses, mending fences, and managing the countless tasks that came with running a ranch. Sarah took over the household duties, cooking meals, cleaning, and tending to the small vegetable garden behind the house. It felt good to be useful, to have purpose again. They fell into an easy companionship, sharing meals and talking about their days. Thomas was a good listener, genuinely interested in what she had to say, even when she was just discussing what vegetables were ready for harvesting or how she had reorganized the kitchen. And slowly, carefully, Sarah began to share pieces of herself, the parts that felt safe. She told him about growing up in Philadelphia, about her mother who had worked as a seamstress, about the books she loved to read, and the dreams she had once harbored of seeing the wider world. Thomas, in turn, shared stories about his life on the ranch, about the challenges of Montana winters and the satisfaction of watching his herd grow, about his hopes for the future. One evening, about a month after her arrival, they were sitting on the porch watching the sun set over the mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Bear was curled up at Sarah's feet, and she absently stroked his fur as Thomas whittled a piece of wood, his hands moving with practiced ease. "Sarah," Thomas said, and she noticed he had started using her first name a few days ago, just as she had begun calling him Thomas instead of Mr. Nash. "I need to ask you something, and I want you to be honest with me." Her heart lurched. "What is it? Are you happy here? I mean, not just content or making the best of things, but actually happy." Sarah considered the question carefully. Despite the secret she still carried, despite the fear that haunted her quiet moments, she realized that she was happy. Happier than she had been in a very long time. "Yes," she said softly, "I am happy here." Thomas's face broke into a smile that made her chest feel warm. "I am glad." "I am happy too, happier than I have been since I came to Montana. Having you here, it has made this house feel like a real home." "Thomas," Sarah began, feeling the weight of her secret pressing down on her once again. "There is something I need to tell you, something important." He set down his whittling and turned to face her fully, his expression serious but not unkind. "All right. I am listening." Sarah opened her mouth, the words finally ready to spill out when a shout from the direction of the barn made them both jump. Thomas was on his feet in an instant, his hand instinctively going to the rifle he kept by the door. "Stay here," he told Sarah, but she followed him anyway, her heart pounding. At the barn, they found one of Thomas's ranch hands, a young man named Billy, struggling to control a horse that had somehow gotten tangled in some loose rope. The animal was panicking, thrashing dangerously, and Billy was in danger of being trampled. Thomas moved quickly, his voice calm and firm as he approached the frightened horse. "Easy there, easy. Nobody is going to hurt you." He kept talking in that same soothing tone as he carefully worked to free the tangled rope, his movements steady despite the danger. Sarah watched, her heart in her throat, as the horse gradually calmed under Thomas's gentle handling. Once the horse was free and settled, Thomas checked it over for injuries while Billy stood nearby, looking shaken. "Are you all right?" Thomas asked the young man. "Yes, sir. I am sorry. I should have been more careful with that rope. We all make mistakes. The important thing is you are safe, and so is the horse. Go on home and get some rest." After Billy left, Sarah helped Thomas put the horse away properly. "That was very brave," she said. Thomas shrugged. "It was just what needed to be done. Horses are valuable, but more than that, they trust us to take care of them. I could not let that animal suffer out of fear." The moment for confession had passed, and Sarah felt both relieved and guilty. She promised herself she would tell him soon, but not tonight. Tonight she just wanted to hold onto the peace and happiness a little longer. As the weeks turned into months, Sarah and Thomas grew closer. There was no single moment when things changed between them, but rather a gradual deepening of affection and trust. Thomas would sometimes brush her hand when passing her something at dinner, and the touch would linger just a moment longer than necessary. Sarah found herself watching him work, admiring the strength in his shoulders, the gentle way he handled the animals, the laugh lines around his eyes. One crisp November morning, Sarah was kneading bread dough when Thomas came into the kitchen, stamping snow from his boots. Winter had arrived early, dusting the ranch in white. "The temperature is dropping fast," he said. "We might be in for a real storm. I am going to bring some of the cattle closer to the barn, make sure everything is secure." "Is there anything I can do to help?" Sarah asked. "Just make sure we have plenty of firewood inside and water stored. If this storm is as bad as I think it might be, we could be housebound for a few days." The storm hit that afternoon with a ferocity that shocked Sarah. Wind howled around the house, and snow fell so thick she could not see the barn. Thomas came in covered in snow, his face red from the cold. "All the animals are secured," he said, pulling off his gloves. "Now we just have to wait it out." They spent the next 3 days essentially snowed in together. Thomas kept the fire going while Sarah cooked, and they rationed their supplies carefully. At night, they would sit by the fireplace, and Thomas would read aloud from the few books he owned while Sarah mended clothes or knitted. It felt domestic and intimate in a way that made Sarah's heart ache with both happiness and guilt. On the third night, with the storm still raging outside, Thomas set down his book and looked at Sarah with an intensity that made her breath catch. "Sarah, I need to tell you something." "What is it?" She set aside her knitting, her hands suddenly trembling. "These past few months with you, they have been the best of my life. I know we started this as a practical arrangement, a mail-order marriage of convenience. But somewhere along the way, my feelings changed. I have fallen in love with you, Sarah Victoria, truly and completely in love with you." Sarah felt tears spring to her eyes. "Thomas, you do not have to say anything if you are not ready," he said quickly. "I just needed you to know how I feel. If you do not feel the same way, if you want to leave come spring, I will understand. But if there is any chance you might come to care for me, I would be the happiest man alive." "I already care for you," Sarah said, her voice breaking. "More than I ever thought possible. But Thomas, there is something you need to know about me, something I should have told you from the beginning." Thomas moved closer, taking her hands in his. "Then tell me now. Whatever it is, we can face it together." Sarah took a deep breath, feeling as if she were standing on the edge of a cliff. "When I answered your advertisement, I was not entirely honest about my situation. My mother died 6 months ago, that part is true, But she did not just leave me alone. She left me with a responsibility, a precious responsibility that I have been terrified to tell you about. Go on, Thomas said gently, his hand still holding hers. My mother had a child late in life, a daughter. My half-sister, Rose. She is 4 years old, Thomas. When my mother died, Rose became my responsibility. But I had no money, no way to care for her properly in Philadelphia. I was working in a factory 14 hours a day and barely making enough to feed us. I was desperate and terrified. Thomas's expression was unreadable. Where is Rose now? She is with the Sisters of Mercy in Philadelphia. It is an orphanage, but a good one. I paid them everything I had to keep her there temporarily, to keep her safe and fed while I found a way to make a life for us. I always planned to send for her, to bring her here once I knew it was safe, once I knew whether you would accept us both. Tears were streaming down Sarah's face now. I know I should have told you in my letters. I know it was dishonest. But I was so afraid that if you knew the truth, you would not want me, and Rose would end up on the streets or worse. There was a long moment of silence, and Sarah felt her heart breaking. She had ruined everything. Thomas would be furious at her deception, and rightly so. She waited for the anger, the rejection, the cold dismissal she deserved. Instead, Thomas pulled her into his arms, holding her close as she sobbed against his chest. Sarah, sweet Sarah, is that what you have been carrying all this time? That terrible fear and responsibility? You are not angry. She managed to ask, Angry? Why would I be angry? You did what you had to do to protect a child, your sister. That takes courage, not dishonesty. He pulled back just enough to look into her eyes. Do you truly think I would turn away a 4-year-old child in need? What kind of man do you think I am? A good one, Sarah whispered. A better man than I dared to hope for. Then let me prove it to you. We will send for Rose. We will bring her here, make her part of our family. This ranch is big enough for all of us, and my heart certainly is. Do you mean that? Sarah hardly dared to believe what she was hearing. Every word. In fact, as soon as this storm clears, we will go into town and send a telegram to the Sisters of Mercy. We will arrange for Rose to come here as soon as possible. And Sarah, if you will have me, we will get married. Not because of some arrangement, but because I love you and I want us to be a real family. Sarah threw her arms around his neck, fresh tears flowing, but these were tears of joy and relief. Yes, yes, I will marry you. I love you, Thomas. I think I have loved you since the day you told me I could have the guest room, that I could have time. You have shown me nothing but kindness and respect, and I love you so much it frightens me. Thomas kissed her then, a gentle, reverent kiss that held all the promise of their future. When they finally pulled apart, both of them were smiling through their tears. I kept your secret, did I not? Thomas said softly, brushing a strand of hair from her face. Or rather, I gave you the space to keep it until you were ready to share it. I could tell from the first day that you were carrying something heavy, something that weighed on you, but I figured you would tell me when the time was right. You knew I had a secret, I suspected. You would get this look sometimes, sad and far away. And you never talked about your plans for the future, like you were afraid to make any. But I trusted that you were a good person, Sarah. I trusted that whatever you were hiding, you had your reasons. I was willing to wait until you were ready. I do not deserve you, Sarah said, shaking her head in wonder. We deserve each other, Thomas corrected. We are both people who have worked hard, who have loved and lost, who are trying to build something good in this wild place. We make a good team, Sarah Victoria. They stayed up late that night, talking about the future. Sarah told Thomas everything about Rose, how she was a bright, cheerful child who loved stories and flowers, how she had their mother's green eyes and a dimple in her left cheek when she smiled. Thomas shared his ideas for expanding the ranch, for building an addition onto the house where Rose could have her own room, for the life they would build together. The storm cleared 2 days later, and true to his word, Thomas took Sarah into Deer Lodge to send a telegram to the Sisters of Mercy. They also visited the small church and spoke with Reverend Martin about arranging a wedding. "I know it might seem rushed," Thomas explained to the Reverend, "but we have already been living together for 3 months, and though we have been proper about it, I would like to make Sarah my wife officially before her sister arrives." Reverend Martin, a kindly man in his 60s, smiled. "Thomas, I have known you for 8 years, and I have never seen you look as happy as you do now. If you have found love, I would be honored to marry you. How does next Sunday sound?" So it was that on a cold but clear Sunday in late November of 1878, Sarah Victoria married Thomas Nash in the small church of Deer Lodge, Montana. Sarah wore the best dress she owned, which Thomas had surprised her by having altered and embellished by the town seamstress. He wore a new suit that he had clearly purchased just for the occasion, though he looked slightly uncomfortable in it. Billy and a few other ranch hands attended, along with several townspeople who knew Thomas. It was a small gathering, but it felt warm and genuine. When Thomas slipped a simple gold band onto Sarah's finger and promised to love and cherish her for the rest of his days, Sarah felt a joy so complete it seemed impossible that just a few months ago she had been terrified and alone in Philadelphia. After the ceremony, they held a small celebration at the ranch. Sarah had baked pies and cakes, and the guests brought dishes to share. There was music and dancing, and Sarah found herself swept up in the simple happiness of it all. When the last guest finally left and they were alone, Thomas carried her over the threshold of their home, both of them laughing. "Welcome home, Mrs. Nash," Thomas said, setting her down gently. "It has been home for a while now," Sarah replied, reaching up to cup his face. "But it feels even more so now." That night, they truly became husband and wife in every sense, and Sarah discovered that the physical expression of love could be as gentle and wonderful as Thomas himself. He was patient and caring, making sure she felt safe and cherished, and when they finally fell asleep in each other's arms, Sarah sent up a silent prayer of thanks for the unlikely series of events that had brought her to this place, to this man. The response from the Sisters of Mercy arrived 2 weeks later. Rose could travel west, but she would need an escort, and the journey would be expensive. Thomas immediately arranged to have the money sent, more than enough to cover Rose's travel expenses and a generous donation to the orphanage besides. "Those sisters kept her safe when you needed them to," he said when Sarah protested at the amount. "That deserves recognition." Rose arrived on a cold January day in 1879. Sarah and Thomas were waiting at the train station, Sarah pacing nervously despite Thomas's reassuring presence. When the train finally pulled in, and Sarah saw the small figure in a gray dress being helped down by a nun, she burst into tears. "Rose!" she called out, rushing forward. The little girl looked around uncertainly, then her face broke into a huge smile. "Sarah, you came back." Sarah scooped her sister into her arms, holding her tight as tears streamed down her face. "Of course I came back. Did I not promise you I would?" "Oh, Rose, I have missed you so much." Rose pulled back to look at Sarah's face, her small hands touching Sarah's cheeks. "You look different. You look happy." "I am happy, sweetheart, and I have someone I want you to meet." Sarah turned to where Thomas stood a respectful distance away, his eyes slightly misty. "This is Thomas. He is my husband, and he is very excited to meet you." Thomas knelt down to be at eye level with Rose. "Hello, Rose. I have heard so much about you. Sarah tells me you like stories and flowers." Rose studied him seriously, her green eyes taking in every detail of his face. Are you really Sarah's husband? I really am. Are you nice to her? I try my very best to be. Good, Rose said decisively. Because Sarah is the best person in the whole world and she deserves someone nice. Thomas laughed, a warm, genuine sound. You know what? You are absolutely right. She is the best person in the whole world. I am very lucky she agreed to marry me. Rose seemed satisfied with this answer. She looked at Sarah and asked, Can I call him Thomas, or do I have to call him Mr. Nash? You can call me whatever feels comfortable, Thomas said. Thomas is fine, or if someday you want to call me something else, that would be fine too. No pressure. Sarah felt her heart swell with love for this man who was so naturally gentle and understanding with her sister. They said goodbye to Sister Margaret, who had escorted Rose, and then headed back to the ranch. Rose sat between them on the wagon, chattering away about the train journey and all the things she had seen. At the ranch, Rose was delighted by everything. She loved Bear, who immediately became her devoted companion. She was amazed by the wide open spaces and the mountains. And when Thomas showed her the room he had built for her, complete with a small bed he had made himself and curtains Sarah had sewn, Rose threw her arms around his legs and hugged him tight. Thank you, thank you, thank you, she cried. Over the following weeks and months, they settled into their new life as a family. Rose adapted to ranch life with the resilience of childhood. She helped Sarah in the garden, learned to gather eggs from the chickens, and followed Thomas around whenever he would let her, asking endless questions about the horses and cattle. Thomas proved to be a natural with children. He was patient with Rose's questions, gentle when she made mistakes, and playful in a way that brought out a side of him Sarah had not seen before. He would give Rose rides on his shoulders, teach her to whistle, and tell her stories about the wild animals that lived in the mountains. One evening in early spring, Sarah stood at the window watching Thomas and Rose in the yard. He was teaching her to skip stones in the water trough, both of them laughing when the stones sank instead of skipped. Bear bounded around them, barking excitedly. You have given us such a wonderful life, Sarah said later that night as she and Thomas lay in bed. Rose adores you. I think she is starting to see you as a father figure. I hope so, Thomas said. I have come to love her as if she were my own daughter. I cannot imagine our life without her now. I was so afraid, Sarah admitted. So terrified that my secret would ruin everything, but you took it all in stride, welcomed us both without hesitation. Sarah, love is not about perfection, it is about acceptance. You came to me carrying a burden, and I am honored that you trust me enough to share it. We all have things in our past, things we wish we could change. What matters is how we move forward. As spring turned to summer, the ranch thrived. Thomas hired another hand to help with the expanding herd, and Sarah started selling her baked goods and preserves in town, bringing in extra income. Rose started attending the small school in Deer Lodge, riding in with Thomas when he went to town for supplies. Life was not without its challenges. A particularly dry summer meant water was scarce, and they had to work hard to keep the cattle watered. Rose fell ill with a fever that had Sarah and Thomas worried sick for 3 days, until it finally broke. There were the normal trials of ranch life, broken fences and injured animals and endless work. But through it all, Sarah and Thomas faced everything together, their love growing deeper and stronger with each passing day. They learned each other's rhythms, the way Thomas liked his coffee in the morning and how Sarah needed a few minutes of quiet before bed. They learned to communicate without words, a glance or a touch conveying volumes. One August evening, Sarah was helping Thomas in the barn when she suddenly felt dizzy. Thomas caught her as she swayed, his face immediately creased with concern. "Sarah, what is wrong? "I am fine," she said, though her face had gone pale. "I just felt lightheaded for a moment." Thomas helped her sit on a hay bale and knelt in front of her. "This is the third time this week you have felt dizzy, and I have noticed you have not been eating much at breakfast. Sarah, is there something you need to tell me?" Sarah looked into his worried eyes and felt a smile spreading across her face despite her nausea. "I think I might be with child." Thomas's eyes went wide. "Truly, I am not certain yet, but all the signs are there. I was planning to wait a bit longer before saying anything, just to be sure." "A baby," Thomas breathed, wonder filling his voice. "We are going to have a baby." He pulled her into his arms, holding her carefully as if she might break. Sarah felt tears of happiness streaming down her face. After everything they had been through, all the hardship and fear and uncertainty, they were building something beautiful together. "Are you happy?" she asked, though she could see the answer in his face. "Happy does not even begin to cover it," Thomas said. "You have given me everything, Sarah. A home, a family, a purpose beyond just working the land, and now a child. I am the luckiest man alive." They told Rose that evening over supper. At first, the little girl looked confused, then uncertain. "A baby?" she asked. "Like a real baby that will live here?" "Yes, sweetheart," Sarah said gently. "In about 6 months you are going to be a big sister." Rose's face went through several expressions before settling on concerned. "Will you still love me when the baby comes?" Sarah's heart clenched. She pulled Rose onto her lap, holding her close. "Oh, Rose, my darling girl, having a baby does not mean we will love you any less. Love is not something that runs out. The more people you have to love, the more your heart grows to hold it all. You will always, always be our Rose, our special girl." "She is right," Thomas added. "You will always be my first daughter, Rose. Nothing can change that." Rose seemed reassured by this. "Can I help take care of the baby?" "We will need all the help we can get," Sarah assured her. The pregnancy progressed smoothly. Sarah continued her work around the ranch, though Thomas was constantly worried about her doing too much. He took over the heavier chores and was always ready with a steadying hand when she needed it. As autumn painted the landscape in golds and reds, Sarah's belly grew round. Thomas would sit with her in the evenings, his hand resting on her stomach, feeling the baby kick. Rose liked to talk to the baby, telling it stories about the ranch and the animals and all the things they would do together. The baby came on a cold February night in 1880. Thomas rode hard to fetch the doctor from town while Rose stayed with Sarah, holding her hand and trying to be brave despite her fear. The labor was long and difficult, and there were moments when Sarah wondered if she had the strength to continue. But she thought of Thomas and Rose waiting for her, of the life they had built together, and she found reserves of strength she did not know she possessed. When Thomas returned with the doctor just as dawn was breaking, he found Sarah exhausted but smiling, holding a tiny bundle wrapped in blankets. Rose was curled up asleep in a chair nearby, having refused to leave Sarah's side all night. "Thomas," Sarah said softly, "come meet your son." Thomas approached slowly, almost reverently. When he looked down at the tiny red face of his newborn son, tears rolled down his cheeks. "A son," he whispered. "We have a son." "What should we name him?" Sarah asked. They had discussed names during the pregnancy but had not settled on anything definite. Now, looking at the tiny life they had created together, Thomas said, "What about Samuel, Samuel Nash? It was my father's name." "Samuel," Sarah repeated, testing it out. "Samuel Nash, it is perfect." The doctor checked both Sarah and the baby and pronounced them healthy, though he insisted Sarah needed rest. After he left, Rose woke up and immediately wanted to see the baby. She peered at him with fascination. "He is so small," she said in wonder. "Was I that small?" "Even smaller," Sarah told her. "You were a tiny little thing." "Can I hold him?" Thomas carefully arranged Rose in a chair and helped her support Samuel's head. The sight of Rose holding her baby brother with such careful concentration made both Sarah and Thomas tear up again. Life with a newborn was exhausting. Samuel was a fussy baby who did not sleep well and seemed to have strong opinions about everything. But he was also perfect, with tiny fingers that would wrap around Sarah's thumb and dark eyes that seemed to study everything with serious intensity. Thomas was a devoted father, walking the floor with Samuel at night when he would not sleep, changing diapers without complaint, and marveling at every tiny milestone. Rose was a helpful big sister, always ready to fetch diapers or help rock the baby or sing to him when he fussed. As Samuel grew, the ranch continued to prosper. Thomas expanded their land holdings, and they now had nearly 500 head of cattle. He hired 2 more permanent hands, and they built a small bunkhouse for them to live in. Sarah's baking business had grown too, and she was supplying several establishments in Deer Lodge with bread and pastries. One evening in late spring, when Samuel was just over a year old and toddling around getting into everything, Sarah and Thomas sat on the porch watching the sunset. Rose was playing with Samuel in the yard, Bear supervising carefully. "You remember the day we met at the train station?" Thomas asked, his arm around Sarah's shoulders. "How could I forget? I was terrified." "So was I," Thomas admitted. "I kept wondering if you would take one look at me and demand to be sent back to Philadelphia." Sarah laughed. "And I was wondering if you would take one look at me and regret ever writing to the marriage broker." "Best decision I ever made," Thomas said, pulling her closer. "Writing that letter changed my life in ways I never could have imagined." "Mine too," Sarah said softly. "I came here desperate and afraid, carrying a secret I was terrified to share. And you wonderful man, you did not just accept my secret. You embraced it, made it part of our life." "Keep it until you are ready. That is what I thought when I first met you," Thomas said. "I could tell you had something you were not telling me, but I figured everyone deserves the chance to share their truth in their own time. I am just grateful you trusted me enough to eventually share it." They sat in comfortable silence, watching their children play. Samuel had just figured out how to climb the porch steps and was attempting it with determination, Rose hovering nearby to catch him if he fell. "I want more," Sarah said suddenly. Thomas looked at her in surprise. "More children. More of everything. More sunsets like this, more mornings waking up next to you, more family dinners, more laughter, more life. I want to grow old with you, Thomas Nash. I want to watch our children grow up and have children of their own. I want every single moment I can have with you." "You will have it," Thomas promised, kissing her temple. "Every moment, every sunrise and sunset, every joy and sorrow. We will face it all together for the rest of our lives." As the years passed, that promise held true. They had 2 more children, a daughter they named Julia in 1882, and another son, Robert, in 1884. The house was expanded to accommodate their growing family, and the ranch became one of the most successful in the region. Rose grew into a beautiful young woman who shared Sarah's love of books and Thomas's way with animals. She eventually married a young teacher from Deer Lodge and settled nearby, giving Sarah and Thomas their first grandchildren before Samuel was even fully grown. Samuel proved to have his father's skill with cattle and his mother's head for business. He took over more and more of the ranch operations as Thomas aged, eventually becoming a full partner. Julia inherited her mother's baking talents and opened a bakery in Deer Lodge that became famous throughout Montana Territory. Robert became a veterinarian, the first in the family to attend university, and returned to practice in Deer Lodge. Through it all, through the joys and sorrows, the triumphs and challenges, Sarah and Thomas faced everything hand in hand. They weathered harsh winters and dry summers, celebrated births and mourned deaths, watched their children grow and their grandchildren be born. On their 25th wedding anniversary in 1903, their family gathered at the ranch for a celebration. Children and grandchildren filled the house with noise and laughter. Samuel had taken over most of the ranch work by then, allowing Thomas to slow down a bit, though he still insisted on riding out every day to check on things. That evening, after everyone else had gone to bed, Sarah and Thomas sat on the porch, just as they had done countless times before. They were older now, Thomas's hair completely gray and Sarah's streaked with silver, but their love had only deepened with time. 25 years, Thomas said, shaking his head in wonder. Where did the time go? Right here, Sarah said, gesturing to the house full of sleeping family. Every moment of it was right here, being lived and loved. I never thanked you properly, Thomas said. For what? For getting on that train. For being brave enough to come out here to marry a stranger. For trusting me with your secret, with Rose, with your heart. You gave me everything, Sarah. You gave me just as much, Sarah replied, taking his hand. You gave me a home when I was homeless, a family when I was alone, love when I thought I would never find it. You told me to keep my secret until I was ready, and that simple act of patience and trust changed my entire life. We changed each other's lives, Thomas said, and I would not change a single moment of it. They sat together in the gathering darkness, listening to the familiar sounds of the ranch, the cattle in the distance, the horses in the corral, the soft hoot of an owl. Inside the house, their family slept safe and warm, the product of a love that had started with a letter and a leap of faith. Sarah thought back to that terrified young woman who had stepped off the train in Deer Lodge all those years ago, carrying a carpet bag and a secret that felt too heavy to bear. If she could go back and tell that young woman that everything would work out, that she would find not just safety but genuine love and happiness, would she even believe it? But it had all worked out, better than she ever could have imagined. The secret she had been so afraid to share had become one of the greatest joys of her life. Rose, that 4-year-old responsibility she had been terrified to reveal, had grown into a wonderful woman with a family of her own. The children she and Thomas had created together had grown into fine adults who were making their own marks on the world. As the years continued to pass, Sarah and Thomas grew old together. They celebrated their 30th, 40th, and eventually their 45th wedding anniversary surrounded by children, grandchildren, and even great-grandchildren. The ranch passed fully into Samuel's hands, though Thomas still liked to ride out and offer advice, even into his 70s. Sarah's baking business had long since been passed to Julia, but she still made bread for the family every week, the familiar rhythm of kneading dough soothing even when her hands grew stiff with age. They had lived through the end of the frontier era, seen Montana achieve statehood in 1889, watched automobiles begin to replace horses in town, though the ranch still relied on horses for most work. Through all the changes, one thing remained constant: their love for each other. Even after decades of marriage, Thomas still brought Sarah wildflowers in the spring. She still made his favorite stew the way he liked it. They still sat on the porch in the evenings, watching the sun set over the mountains, Bear's descendants at their feet. On a warm summer evening in 1923, 45 years after Sarah had first stepped off that train, she and Thomas sat on their porch for the last time together. Thomas had been feeling poorly for a few weeks, though he insisted it was nothing. But Sarah knew, the way you know things after sharing a life with someone for so long, that he was tired, that his body was wearing out. "You have any regrets?" Thomas asked her, his hand clasped in hers. "Not a single one," Sarah said honestly. Not about coming here, not about telling you my secret, not about any of it. Every choice I made led me to you and to this beautiful life we built together. How could I regret that? Good, Thomas said with satisfaction. Because I have been thinking, and I have decided that I have lived the most extraordinary life. A woman like you taking a chance on a rancher like me, that was my great fortune. Everything good in my life came from that. Thomas passed away peacefully in his sleep 3 days later, Sarah holding his hand. He was 77 years old and had lived to see his children successful, his grandchildren grown, and his great-grandchildren born. The funeral was held at the same church where they had been married, and it seemed like half of Montana turned out to pay their respects to the man who had helped build the community and had been known for his fairness and kindness. Sarah grieved deeply, but not despairingly. She had been blessed with 45 years with the man she loved, and that was more than many people ever got. She continued to live at the ranch with Samuel and his family, enjoying her remaining years surrounded by the family she and Thomas had created. She would sit on the porch in the evenings, and sometimes she would swear she could feel Thomas there beside her, his arm around her shoulders, watching the sun set over the mountains they both loved. She would tell the great-grandchildren stories about their great-grandfather, about how he had been kind and patient, about how he had told her to keep her secret until she was ready, about how that simple act of grace had been the foundation of their great love story. Sarah lived to be 82 years old, passing away peacefully in 1926, surrounded by the sprawling family she had helped create. She died knowing she had been deeply loved and had loved just as deeply in return. Her last words were reported by Rose, who was holding her hand. "Tell Thomas I am ready now. Tell him I am coming home." She was buried next to Thomas in the small cemetery outside Deer Lodge, their graves marked with simple headstones. But their real legacy was not in stone but in the family they had built, the ranch that still thrived, the love story that their descendants told and retold through the generations. Years later, great-great-grandchildren would ask about the woman in the faded photograph, the one with the serious eyes and the small smile. And someone would tell them the story of Sarah Victoria, who came to Montana as a mail-order bride with a secret, and Thomas Nash, the rancher who told her to keep it until she was ready. They would tell them about a love built on patience and trust, about a family created from hope and courage, about a life well lived in the wild beauty of Montana. And in the telling, the story would live on, a reminder that sometimes the greatest love stories begin not with certainty, but with a leap of faith and someone patient enough to let you find your way to trust. The ranch still stood, passed down through Samuel's line, and on summer evenings, if you sat on that same porch and watched the sun set over the mountains, you could almost feel the presence of those two people who had loved each other so well, whose story had become legend in their family. The secret that Sarah had been so afraid to share, the responsibility that had weighed so heavily on her young shoulders, had become not a burden but a blessing. Rose and her descendants, Samuel, Julia and Robert and theirs, they were all part of the legacy of trust and love that had started with a frightened woman on a train platform and a kind man who gave her the space and time to share her truth. In the end, that is what their story was about, the transformative power of patience, the strength found in vulnerability, and the profound beauty of a love that accepts all of you secrets and all and says simply, "Keep it until you are ready. I will be here when you are."